No church, no church, no church, cause they only want your money, y'all. No church, no church, no times got you looking like a dummy, y'all. No church, no church, no church.
Shabbat Shalom, family. It's your boy Solemn Prophet here with Professor S, and this is another episode of Shabbat Talk. We got my beautiful sisters, Tess and Cindy, in the building. Tess will be joining us in a moment, and Sister Jasmine, my favorite cousin. Don't tell nobody. We got my other cousin, Danny, in the building. He's standing right next to me, so he's going to be following along and add to the conversation later on. And then we have, last but definitely not least, my beautiful and wonderful mother-in-law, Esperanza, Mrs. Thomas. All right. So tonight, because I know we've been going, we've literally spent a month on Galatians chapter 3. So I know you guys who've been watching are kind of like burnt out. To be honest, we're a little burnt out of it. We're not tired of it, obviously, but we're a little burnt. So what we decided to do this week was pivot. I told you guys that we're gonna go through Paul's epistles, but we're gonna also, touch other topics as well throughout. Now, the overall topic isn't really changing much. We're still on Paul. However, we're just gonna go through an article, and I found this article interesting. I personally kind of identify with the article. Full disclosure, I read half of the article, so I didn't even read the full article yet. But about the amount that I've read tonight is probably what we're going to be able to get through tonight anyway. But I found the article very interesting, and it'll be a good conversation starter, and it'll be a nice little break from pounding you guys with Galatians. So we're going to go into this article, and we're going to give commentary. I am going to pause here and there and ask questions and get some dialogue from you guys. So go ahead and get ready for that, because there's too many people in here for there not to be any dialogue.
Welcome to Shabbat Talk, everyone. We're going through this article. I actually, Solemn Prophet had sent it to me earlier today. I had intended to read it, but my phone had died, and I just did never get to read it. So it's going to be, I read like the first 3 or 4 sentences. So this is going to be very interesting for me. I wanted to be able to read it earlier today, but yeah, so we'll go through it and see what it says. It looked like a very intriguing little study on that. So let's dig into it.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, I only got through half, but the parts that I did read was interesting. Not saying I agree with the entire article, but it was I identify with it. I saw myself in it. And it's funny because the actual article, or the paper, the research paper that we're gonna go over, was written in 1998. Which was almost 20 years before my own personal spiritual awakening into Torah observance. So to see 20 years in between two separate individuals, right, but very similar stories, I identify with it. So we're gonna go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so the title of this is called Paul Taught Torah. And I started reading this first paragraph, and I was hooked just from this first paragraph. Like I said, I saw myself in it. So at any given time, family, if you have any questions, concerns, maybe something came to light, maybe you had a thought, please unmute your mic, join in on the discussion. We don't want to just be reading from an article. We want to have a fluent conversation. So I'll start. So he says, in 1994, our family moved to a 10-acre island off the north coast of British Columbia, where I worked as a lighthouse keeper. Okay. Although we greatly missed having the fellowship of other Christian believers, Being out of the rat race and away from the busyness of church life gave us more time for Bible study than we'd ever had before. In the absence of organized religion, we had to accept full responsibility for our own spiritual lives. With that in mind, I began to examine our beliefs to see which ones were based solidly on scripture and which ones were merely the teachings and traditions of men. Like I said, I identify with this. This was
Boom.
me.
Me too. Me too.
This was me to a full T. The only difference was I didn't go to British Columbia on a 10-acre island. I went to Turkey on a 1-year tour unaccompanied. I didn't have my family. It was me by myself. And the Christian presence in Turkey was already low because Turkey's a Muslim country. But on the military side, we were stuck on base. We couldn't go off base. And the Christian presence on base was very minimal. There was Christians, but a lot of them, let's be real, when you get away from your family, your friends, you tend to wild out. And a lot of them was wilding out. They weren't even interested in Bible study or church or anything like that. And I had already gotten to the point in my faith, in my walk, where I knew that church was iffy, right? It was iffy. I'm gonna just say that. So I didn't go to church anyway. So when I got there, I already didn't go to church. People wasn't trying to do Bible study. It was just me by myself with the word. You know what I'm saying? So I had more time for Bible study than I ever had before in my life. That was true. That was me. And then I was in the absence of organized religion. I didn't have a Christian influence around me. Sometimes it's hard to break away from certain things if that's the whole environment that you're in. Sometimes you have to remove yourself, or more importantly, sometimes the Most High himself has to remove you from a complete situation to put you in position to be able to hear him correctly, right? And then he said we had to accept full responsibility for our own spiritual lives, right? So you didn't have to lean on a pastor or lean on some type of elder or some type of mentor for guidance. When you out there on the island by yourself, or when you out there in a different country by yourself, you are responsible for yourself. And so you have a different mindset when you go through that, right? And then it says, I began to examine our beliefs to see which ones were based solidly on scripture and which ones were merely teachings of men. And that's exactly what I did. I started to reread the Bible. I started to ask questions. I started to, read it like I read it, like I was reading it for the first time, right? And then based on those questions and certain research that I was doing, I was probably reading scripture 3 to 4 hours a day, to be honest with you. Because all I did was go to work, go to the gym and work out, come home, read scripture, go to sleep, do it all over again. And this was a year's time frame. Now, he says, many of our beliefs were easily confirmed in scripture. However, in 1998, we began to find clues that some of our beliefs were not in agreement with the practices of the original New Testament apostles and believers. Further study has uncovered what seems to be extensive and conclusive evidence that mainstream Christianity has misunderstood the New Testament's message regarding the purpose and value of the Most High's Old Testament laws. So, full disclosure, this individual is a Christian. So this article is going to come from a Christian perspective, from a Christian individual. But even though it's coming from a Christian's perspective, even he says, right, what seems to be extensive and conclusive evidence that mainstream Christianity has misunderstood the New Testament's message regarding the purpose and value of the Old Testament laws, which is also considered the laws of Moses, aka the Torah, aka the Most High's laws, God's laws, however you want to put it. So I found that interesting that, a Christian doing independent research, independent study came to this conclusion on his own, which I found it very, very fascinating. It says, I have prepared this paper in order to share a portion of what we have found and to seek the counsel of other Christians, especially those who know us and may be concerned about where our studies are leading. When I read this sentence, I thought to myself, like, man, I wish I would have did something like this when I first became a Torah observer, because I was radical. Like when I first became, when I first left Christianity, I was bashing Christians. I was going in, and it was very, very unhealthy, right? A lot of people was concerned for me. A lot of people were reaching out to my wife, like, "Hey, what's going on with your husband? We need to pray for him." And da 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 da. I was going through it because I dealt with the situation slightly differently than this individual. If I would have wrote a paper like this, it probably would have been a lot more peaceful. But hey, you can't change how, or you can't judge how somebody chooses to deal with a situation. They have to go through those emotions and emotions and everything like that on their own, and then, you know, come to the understanding how they come to it. But it says, I expect that few people. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's something. I was muted when I started trying before. So I was just going to say that is something that tends to happen. You know, you do become very emotional when you recognize that you've been fed some half truths and some full lies. You know what I'm saying? You do become very emotional, and your first reaction is to try to come out against it and oppose it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And not that you shouldn't do that, but when you're so emotionally charged, it can come across in a way that's not really the best way for it to come out. You know, I know it probably did for me as well.
All right. So it says, I expect that few people will agree with everything in this study. Nevertheless, I pray that you will find food for thought and some ideas that will prompt you to study the scriptures prayerfully for yourself. Please share your comments, ideas, and concerns with us. So this is an introduction. I thought this was great. I wish I would have done it, but hey, never mind. So he breaks this down like a science experiment, and I like it. So he has a hypothesis, and for those who aren't really familiar with the scientific method, your hypothesis is just basically your guess. What you think, you know, if you like, all right, let's do a science experiment on rain, and then you say, you know, my hypothesis is that when it rains, the temperature outside will drop, and if your hypothesis is correct, when you check the temperature, if it's lower, then your hypothesis is correct. If the temperature increases, then your hypothesis was wrong, right? It's just a guess. You're guessing, and then you're going to do your research and test your hypothesis to see if it's correct. So his hypothesis is that Paul taught the Gentile believers to follow the law of Moses, aka the Torah. So his premise, right, and the premise is basically the basis for his argument, okay? And the vast majority, number one, the vast majority of Paul's teachings was not recorded because it was done verbally, in person, face to face. Number two, most of Paul's basic instruction for new believers was not included in his letters. Number three, according to Paul, all of his unrecorded verbal teachings agreed with his own lifestyle. Number four, Paul, along with other Jewish believers, continued to follow the laws of Moses after accepting the Messiah. Paul lived a Torah-observant lifestyle. So, like I said, this is coming from a Christian perspective. So when he's making reference to the Hebrews and the Hebrew culture, he's going to call it Jewish. So when you see Jewish, just know that he doesn't understand that Judaism is a false religion. So just for purposes of you guys who are watching it. So basically, all right. So number five, Paul taught the Gentiles to follow his own lifestyle and example. And number six, by his own Torah observant lifestyle and by specifically teaching the Gentiles to follow his own example and the example of the Messiah, Paul was teaching the Gentiles to follow the laws of Moses. Okay, so that's his premise. Now he has supporting evidence for numbers 7 through 16. Paul affirmed the whole law. Number 8, Paul used the Old Testament as the textbook for instructing all believers. Number 9, the New Testament contains examples where Paul instructed the Gentiles to follow specific Old Testament laws. Number 9, the New Testament contains examples. No, I read that already. Number 10, Paul taught that the Gentile believers became united with the Jewish believers as full citizens of Israel, the descendants of Jacob. In the Messiah, there was no difference between Jewish and Gentile believers. Number 11, under the new covenant, the Most High writes his Torah on the hearts and in the minds of his people. Number 12, Paul defines a spiritual Jew as a person who keeps the law's requirements. Number 13, the Messiah taught that the law would not be changed until the earth passed away. Number 14, the Messiah commissioned his disciples to teach both Jews and the Gentiles everything that he had taught his disciples. Now, this was the first one that I got like a red flag on. I wouldn't say the Messiah commissioned them to teach the Jews and the Gentiles. I would say that the Gentile portion of this came after, when Peter received instruction from the Holy Spirit through a vision, him and Cornelius, and then they witnessed the Holy Spirit come down on both Jews and Gentiles, and that was confirmation for Peter to know that the Gentiles could also receive that inheritance amongst the Jews as well. Because even when the Messiah was teaching, he told them, go to the four corners and preach the gospel, but he told you, don't go into the land of the heathen. Don't go that way, right? And he was telling them, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he was focusing his ministry on Israel, but when you look at it from the full term perspective, he was building those individuals up to teach, to be equipped to teach. So when the Holy Spirit made its move after he had died and resurrected and ascended, then they would already be prepared to do the work. So this was the only one that
I believe where he's getting that from is after Messiah had resurrected, and he told them to go into all nations and teach to every creature, right? Up until that point, he had only said not to go to the Gentiles, because there was a specific purpose up until the point of him dying and resurrecting. So I believe that's where he's getting it from, was after his resurrection when he said that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I get it. Okay, that was number 14. Number 15, Paul did not specifically exempt the Gentiles from any Old Testament laws, except maybe one. And I don't know, I think this was my second red flag. I
think the one he's referring to there is probably circumcision.
Yeah.
If I were to guess.
He wasn't exempting them from circumcision.
Yeah.
He was telling them that getting physically circumcised isn't going to save them. You know, we just literally went through all of this in
we did. Yeah.
Circumcision is, man, that's look. But yeah, anyways.
That's a big step, you know, for someone who just heard about it. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, go on.
Yeah. Hey, don't go back outside.
Oh my goodness.
I told them that they could stay out and play for a little bit. Don't go back outside. So with this one, what Paul did, he didn't exempt the Gentiles from keeping the law. What he did was he gave them a small sample size, a small portion size of a few different laws that they could actually, focus on and do, with the intent to instruct them, to tell them, hey, take these few laws, follow them, but then make sure on the weekend, when the Shabbat comes, right, you're going to go to the temple and you're going to learn the Torah, because the Torah is going to be taught in the temple every Shabbat. So they gave them a few things to start off with the intent that they would continue to go each week to get more and more and more knowledge of the Torah. He didn't exempt them from anything, okay? He didn't have the authority to exempt them from anything. All right, number 16. Paul's writings are often misinterpreted when they are separated from the context of Paul's own Torah-observant lifestyle. 2 Peter confirms that. No worries, no harm, no foul there. All right, so his hypothesis, Paul taught the Gentile believers to follow the law of Moses, i.e. the Torah, So he says, so all of the scriptures are going to be in blue, and everything that looks like this is his own commentary. So he says, Paul did not teach people to observe the law in order to be saved or justified. We literally just covered this the last 4 weeks. Okay, so if you've been with us this whole month, you know that this statement right here is absolutely true. Okay, that was not the purpose of the law. He taught them to observe the law in order to honor the Most High as they walked out, it says the Christian life, right, in the footsteps of the Messiah. Right? So remember, we said the Torah was always pointing to the Most High and giving us correction and guiding us to be able to live in a state of righteousness, right? And it was for those who were focused on carnal, physical acts, right, who were following the Torah. It was to build them up to get to a faith point. But faith is what had happened. Because the Gentiles had faith right out the gate, but they didn't have the Torah. They didn't have the knowledge of the Torah. So they needed instruction to know what to do and what not to do to build on top of their faith so that the faith and the Torah could work together in them. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you had the people who were strong on the Torah. They knew what to do and what not to do, but they were empty on the inside. They didn't have that faith. So they needed the faith to work hand in hand with what they were doing to get to the fullness of what the Messiah and what Paul was talking about. So he quotes Romans 1 and 5. All of his scriptures he's used in the NIV. So I wanted to pull all of these up in other versions. So right here it says, I'll still read the NIV though. It says, Romans 1 and 5, it says, we receive grace and apostleship to call people from among all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith, okay? To the obedience that comes from faith. It says, Paul did not teach people to follow all the extra man-made laws that the Jewish rabbis had invented as fence laws in order to guard the laws of Moses, but which were not part of the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. We've mentioned this as well this past month, and we've mentioned it in other Shabbat talks as well. What the Pharisees, Sadducees, teachers of the laws, what they were doing was they weren't just saying, okay, well, here's the law, you need to keep it. They were adding their own laws, adding their own traditions, adding their own statutes, so to speak, right? The law would say one thing, and then they would say either something completely different or close, but they would make it like more restrictive. Okay, and if you didn't abide by what they said the law stated, then they would try to, judge you and condemn you. And so a lot of this was going on. A lot of twisting of scripture was going on.
Romans 1 and 5. By whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name. And then the scriptures version says, through whom we have received favor and office of the emissary for belief obedience among all the nations on behalf of his name.
Okay. Cool. So hold on. You said the first scripture you read, what version was that from?
King James.
That was a King James, and then the other one was TS 2009.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Do you want me to put that back up, or?
No, you good. I just wanted to make sure we hit the scriptures as we go through. Okay, so it says, Paul did not teach people to offer animal sacrifices in their backyards. The Torah actually forbids that. The commands concerning animal sacrifices could be legally carried out only at the temple in Jerusalem, and then only by the descendants of Aaron, or the priests, right? The Levitical priesthood. Paul did not teach people to punish rebellious teenagers and Sabbath breakers by stoning them to death. Penalties like that could be imposed only by properly appointed judges within the theocracy of Israel whose constitution was the Torah. Like we were saying, in regards to eye for an eye, and that one of the first Shabbat talks we did, we broke down what the Messiah meant by eye for an eye, and what the Messiah also meant when he was concerned in divorce and remarriage. But basically, with eye for an eye, so many people basically say, you know, if you hit me, I can hit you back. But then there would be a contradiction, because the Messiah said, you heard it said an eye for an eye, but if your brother, you know, slaps you across the cheek, turn to him the other cheek also, right? And we broke that down what it meant, because when you go to the actual origin, go to the Torah where it's quoting that from, it's breaking it down and it's telling you that an eye for an eye, the punishment for that, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, life for life, all of that was within the confines of a Hebrew or an Israelite court. It was an official capacity, and there was specific proceedings that had to happen. You had to have witnesses, right? And somebody had to be deemed guilty. A verdict of guilty had to be given by the righteous judge in order for one of those types of sentences to even be carried out. So what he's saying right here makes total and complete sense, right? Within the theocracy of Israel. The theocracy of Israel was basically the government of Israel, whose constitution, we know constitution well, don't we? You infringing on my constitutional rights. I have the right to free speech. I have the right to bear arms. All of those, right? Well, the constitution was the Torah. The constitution was the Torah. All right, Jewish scholars have identified 613 distinct commands in the Torah. Of those, fewer than 200 commands apply to the average person. Many of the other laws applied only to priests or to other Levites who assisted at the temple. Some laws applied only to men, some only to women. Other commands applied only to kings or to farmers or to slave owners. And then he says, Paul taught the Gentile believers to follow the laws of Moses that could be followed in their own situation. We've also mentioned this too, right? We say, you know, people say, oh, the Torah is burdensome, it's hard to keep, and it's so much this, so much that, right? But majority of the Torah don't even apply to the everyday person. If you ain't a farmer, if you ain't a priest, if you ain't a king, if you don't have employees working under you, if you're not a slave owner, what else? If you are not traveling, if you are not involved in an altercation, if you're not involved in some type of fornication, case of adultery, if you're not involved in theft or whatever the case may be, a lot of these laws don't apply to you. So you can narrow that 613 down to probably about 120. Now, if 120 laws is too difficult for you to consider, ask yourself, how many laws outside your walls does your state, does your city, does your, county, right? Not including federal. There's thousands of laws. There's thousands of laws, and I don't hear people say, there's too many laws, I can't keep up with them. No.
Heck, there's more traffic laws if you only wanted to break it down into just one category. There's more traffic laws.
There's more traffic laws in your city than there are in the entire Torah. More traffic
that apply to you. They likely apply to you.
So that's to kind of put it into perspective, okay? Now, going into his premise, the vast majority of Paul's teachings was not recorded because it was done verbally, in person, face-to-face. Most of Paul's basic instruction for new believers was not included in his letters. I agree with this. I always say, right, when we're reading Paul's epistles, we're reading his response to requests that was made to him. So they had to make a request either by face-to-face, in person, or they wrote him a letter for him to respond in a letter. We don't have that information. We just have what Paul wrote back, right? So that's part of it. And then what he mentions here is there's a lot of his teaching wasn't recorded because it was done verbally. Paul, and you're going to see, he quotes very good scriptures. Paul often mentions in his epistles how he visited the place that he's talking to. Hey, when I was there with you and I broke bread with you, when we hung out, when we fellowship, when I taught you, right? Let's remember those things, right? You're falling astray, but remember those things. Remember, I broke bread. Remember, we hung out. You know what I'm saying? Remember, I stayed with you for 3 days, or I stayed with y'all a week, or I stayed with y'all a month. Like, Paul often referred back to that in his epistles. So if he's acknowledging that he spent time with these individuals, he knew these individuals, that means he knew what they were dealing with, what they were struggling with. And so they felt comfortable enough to reach out and request whatever aid they needed, right? Hey, Paul, help us with this type of sin. Help us with this type of guidance. We need you to help us. And what we have in the Bible is his response, right? A lot of that wasn't done in an official capacity that could be recorded in an epistle or recorded in a testimony, right? A lot of that happened face to face. So he says, in several of the congregations, Paul had remained for more than a year teaching the Old Testament scriptures. We just read Galatians 1 through 3, and in Galatians 1 through 3, he quoted the Torah often. You might not realize it's the Torah because a lot of people don't read the Old Testament. They jump straight to the New Testament. So they don't even know Torah when they hear it. But a lot of times, Paul is quoting directly from the Torah, or he's making reference to the Torah, specifically applying to whatever he's trying to tell them. So he says, finally, brothers, we instructed you. So this is 1 Thessalonians 4, 1 and 2. And you can pull that one up. And after I read this, then we can pull it up in the other 2 versions. It says, finally, brothers, we instructed you how to live in order to please the Most High, as in fact you are living. Now we ask you and urge you in the Messiah to do this more and more, for you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of the Messiah. So he's saying right here, like, we instructed you. Who is we? Paul and his emissaries, Paul and the people he was with, the apostle that was underneath him, those who followed his followers, and those who he enabled to teach, right? We instructed you. Who is you? Who did he write his letter to? That's you. He's telling them, yo, we instructed y'all. We instructed you how to live in order to please the Most High. So how do you please the Most High? We were there with you. We taught you. We instructed you. And then it says, for you know what instructions we gave you. So you know what we taught you. That's indicating, that's conclusive evidence indicating that they spent time with Paul. Paul spent time with them, and there was an exchange that's not recorded here. He's referencing it, but we don't have what he taught them. But Paul can't contradict himself because scripture can't contradict itself. So if Paul is saying here that they taught him something, well, Paul taught them something, right? Or Paul's people taught them something, then it has to be on the same page with everything else that he's mentioning in the rest of his scriptures. He can't say in some of his letters, oh, do this. And then in another one of his letters, say, don't do this. Or I taught you not to do this. Then that would make him a hypocrite, and he's not. So I'm going to stop my share. Go ahead and pull that one up, boss man.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. So we got it here in King Jimmy and in the Scriptures 2009. So, and that's verse 1 and 2. So, furthermore, then we beseech you, brethren, and exhort you by the Master Yahusha, that as ye have received of us how ye ought to walk and to please the Most High, so ye would abound more and more. For ye know what commandments we gave you by the Master Yahusha. So in the Scriptures version, we got for the rest then, brothers, we beg you, because it's what beseech really means, to like beg someone, right? We beg you and call upon you in the Master Yahusha, that as you received from us how ye should walk and to please Elohim, you should excel still more. for you know what commands we gave you through the Master Yahusha. Commands right there. Now, what commands do you think Paul was giving them? Do you think he was making up his own commands?
Yeah.
Giving them the commandments of men that he later talks against? I don't think so.
No, Paul was doing what they said Moses did. They said that Moses did his own thing. No.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. So next one we got is 2 Thessalonians 2:15. And it says, so then, brothers, stand firm and hold to the teachings we passed on to you, whether by word of mouth or by letter. So this also is confirming that teachings was also done, via word of mouth, speaking, right? And a lot of that was done face to face, or a message being passed from one person to another person. Then it says, or by letter. We're reading one of those methods, right? This book is a letter, but it wasn't the only way that they taught. So you can't try to extrapolate one thing and focus on one thing when it was a plethora and there's reference given to that there was just more than just what Paul wrote in his letters, right? They spent time with these folks. They had all types of conversations about the scriptures. But what scriptures did they have conversations about? Did they have a Bible? Was it out back then? You know what I'm saying? If you ask yourself that question when you're reading a lot of the New Testament, if they didn't have a Bible back then, right? What were they reading from and what were they teaching? Because the Gospels were being lived during that time. They didn't have Gospels. They didn't have a Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. They were living. What was the Messiah teaching? What was the disciples teaching? After the Messiah died, what were they teaching from? What was the instruction? What was the Bible? What was the guidance? What was the instruction for them to say how did they live and how not to live? It was the Torah. It was the Old Testament law, statutes, and commandments. That's what they had. They didn't have a Bible. Now we have a Bible. We have, well, not all of it, but we have a lot of the manuscripts that was written during that time and after that time that was put together in various manuscripts and compiled into a single unit. But they didn't have that. I feel like I feel like a lot of us think in our minds, even though it doesn't make sense when you really think about it, but in the moment, we think that they also had the same Bible that we have today. And then they were also should have the same understanding as us. Two different cultures, two different geographical locations, two different time frames, two different types of people. They were bred different back then. I'm just being real. They were bred different. Okay, so we read that, right?
2 Thessalonians 2:15, right?
Yep.
Right, here we go. So, 2 Thessalonians 2:15. Therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold the traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistles. Whether we spoke it to you, or whether you're reading it in this letter or another letter that I've sent, right? So then, brothers, stand fast and hold the tradition which you were taught, whether by word or by our letter. And just to clarify what this word here, tradition, means, that is, I don't know if y'all can see that, but it says transmission, that is concretely a precept, specifically the Jewish traditionary law or ordinances or traditions.
So hold on, even more than this, right? It says concretely a precept. A precept itself, if you look at the Hebrew word for precept, a precept by itself is a law, an instruction, or a command from the Torah. That's what a precept is. So if that is embedded in the definition of what we see translated to tradition, it's right there. It's solidified, right? All right, what's the 2009 say?
No, I had already read it, but
oh, my bad.
So then, brothers, stand fast and hold the traditions which you were taught, whether by word or by our letter.
Same. Facts. So this, I mean, so far this brother's he's making a good case.
Mm-hmm.
He's making a good case. Okay. In the name of the Messiah, we command you, brothers, to keep away from every brother who is idle and does not live according to the teaching you received from us. Now, this is a little bit deeper, only because, well, one, he says, we command you, and I'm interested to see what the other versions say. But aside from that, it says to keep away from every brother who is idle. To be idle means to not do anything, to not take action, right? So if they're idle, meaning they're not doing anything. And it says that does not live according to the teaching you received from us. What did we just confirm? That the teaching that Paul and his group, his entourage, would have taught the Torah. So he's telling them, stay away from people who don't do nothing and don't live according to the Torah. This is a Paul epistle. 2 Thessalonians 3 and 6. So we'll look at see what the KJV and what the TS 2009 has to say to maybe shed some additional light.
So right here we've got the 2 Thessalonians 3:6. And now we command you, brethren, in the name of our Master Yahushua HaMashiach, that ye would draw yourselves from every brother that walketh disorderly, and not after the tradition or the precepts which he received of us. So he's talking about he had taught them, and once again we can see here the tradition, same word, talking about the precept or an ordinance, right? The scriptures here says, but we command you, brothers, in the name of our Master Yahushua Messiah, that you would draw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the tradition which you received from us. That same as King James, pretty much.
Same, pretty much. Right? These are three separate versions.
Idle. Interesting though that NIV would translate disorderly as idle.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a red flag. I honestly don't read from NIV anymore. To be
honest.
I
really don't either. It says, looking at the definition of the Greek, it's irregularly or immorally.
Yeah, irregularly or immoral. Yep. Yep. So in addition to not doing anything, which is the definition of idle in the NIV, it adds even more context and evidence to it. So disorderly meaning outside of order. You know, we always say, you know, the Most High does things in decency and in order, right? That's contrary to that, and it also talks about having a kind of like a malicious intent added to it too. With the
you could almost say you could almost replace lawlessly, right? Yeah. This is someone who's walking without the law.
Okay. It says, what you heard from me, keep as the pattern of sound teaching with faith and love in the Messiah. And this is 2 Timothy 1 and 13. So he's saying, what you heard from me. What did they hear from him? The same things he taught them. Round and around we go, right? Keep as the pattern of sound teaching. So he's telling them what he taught them to keep as the pattern of sound teaching. What is a pattern? A pattern is something that doesn't change. It consistently repeats itself, right? And it doesn't change. So if they're supposed to keep it as sound teaching, meaning sound meaning is good to go, right? You've heard sound teaching, you've heard sound doctrine, depending on what verses you've read it out of, right? Something that is true, something that is correct, something that is firm and is a foundation. And if it's firm as a foundation and that you're supposed to keep it as a pattern, meaning that it's consistent. It's not just one time and and is done. It's consistently being used as that foundational piece that you're supposed to keep onto. And that's what they heard from him. 2 Timothy 1:13. And I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. So 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 13. Hold fast the form of sound words which thou hast heard of me in faith and love, which is in Messiah Yahusha. So once again, sound words. And what you've heard, specifically heard of Paul. So what's Paul told you that you've heard with your ears, not just read, right? Hold the pattern of sound words which you have heard from me in belief and love, which are in Messiah Yahusha. Right there, once again. And you can go, what's this? Words here. Words is something said. Interesting. Logos, right? Something said. The divine expression that is Messiah. So you've got, even, you know, when you go back to John 1:1, where it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the Most High. The Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim, right? And then the Word became flesh and dwelt among men, right? And we know that that is Messiah. But what word is being spoken of at that point? He's talking about the Torah. Messiah was literally the Torah in human form, like come and become a human, right?
Yeah.
And you've got that exact same word right here, interestingly.
Logos? Is logos?
Yeah, it's there. Yeah. Sound words, logos.
Anyway, yeah.
Mhm.
That's dope. I didn't even see that. That's dope. Logos. Wow. That's good. That's good stuff. All right. What it says. Oh, and the things you have heard me say, so it's kind of similar to that, right? In the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. Like we said, the people who was with Paul, the people who he enabled to teach, he was telling them to do the same thing, right? And the things you have heard me say, what have we heard? You know what I'm saying? What have we heard him say? Or what did they hear him say? 2 Timothy 2:2. And then this one says, and take note of those who live according to the pattern we gave you. We just read about a pattern up here. Okay. Pattern, a blueprint. Like this whole month, I've been giving y'all the same blueprint, right? Every episode, every Shabbat, right? The 5 things to do, to follow as a guideline as you go through Paul's epistles. Yes, that's a pattern. So they was giving them a pattern of what he told them, the stuff you heard him say, the stuff you heard from him. Same thing. 2 Timothy 2:2, and then Philippians 3:17.
Okay, I was just looking at 3:17. Interesting.
Yeah, you can pull it up.
Yep, we got it right here, and then we'll go back to 2:2, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine.
So Philippians 3:17 says, brothers, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an example, right? But the scriptures version here says, become joint imitators of me, brothers, and look at those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. They're saying we're the pattern that you can be imitators of, right? In another passage, he says to be an imitator of him as he imitates Messiah, right? And he couldn't say he was imitating Messiah if he wasn't really imitating Messiah, right? If he wasn't keeping the Torah, he couldn't say he was imitating Messiah. Right?
Facts.
And then what was
What
that?
Messiah said? He
Two
said, if you love me, you will do what? Keep my
commandments.
So I'm sure Paul loved him, because you don't do all of that. You don't go that hard for somebody if you don't love them.
And getting stoned all the time and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't take many boulders to the face if if you didn't actually care. You know what I'm saying? You'd be like, yeah, one boulder to the face. I think I'm done. You know. But,
Okay.
yep. So here we've got 2 Timothy 2:2. And what you have heard from me among many witnesses, entrust these to trustworthy men who shall be competent to teach others as well. So he's saying, what you've heard from me, what I've said, what I've spoken to you, you can tell that to trustworthy men who are competent to teach. Pretty much says the same thing in King James. Says, and the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also.
They should call the KJV the Shakespeare edition.
Right.
Thou and thou and thou.
Yeah.
All right, moving number 3. According to Paul, all of his unrecorded verbal teachings agreed with his own lifestyle. Therefore, I urge you to imitate me. For this reason, I am sending you Timothy, my son, whom I love, who is faithful in the Most High. He will remind you of my way of life in Messiah, which agrees with what I teach everywhere in every church. Bam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I urge you to imitate me.
His lifestyle was what he was teaching everywhere he went.
I mean,
all you have to do is look at how he lived. And what was he doing all through Acts? He was keeping the Shabbat. He was celebrating the feast days. He was, you can't. He even went and took a Nazirite vow, and went specifically to Jerusalem to shave his head when it was done. Yep. You know what I'm saying?
The purification rites. Yep. Yeah.
And right, where's the Nazirite vow? That's nowhere from the so-called New Testament. Yeah. You find the Nazirite vow in the Torah.
Numbers chapter 6. So I'm gonna read this. You can pull up Corinthians 4:16 and 17, and I'm gonna read this paragraph right here. Although we don't have a written record of Paul's basic instructions for new believers, the New Testament does contain significant information about Paul's lifestyle. Understanding the lifestyle that Paul lived after he accepted the Messiah is essential to understanding Paul's basic teachings, which formed the foundation and provided the context for Paul's written epistles or letters. Paul's lifestyle provides the key criteria that we can use to evaluate various interpretations of Paul's writings. Any interpretation that disagrees with Paul's lifestyle is erroneous, is null and void, doesn't
right there.
matter.
Right there, just right there.
Cut it out.
Sums it up. Sums it up. If you have an interpretation that disagrees with his lifestyle, then you're misinterpreting Paul, which is exactly what Peter said.
Done.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I got 1 Corinthians 16 and 17, right?
Yep.
Wherefore I beseech you, be ye followers of me. And for this cause I have sent unto you Timotheus, who is my beloved son, and faithful in the master, who shall bring you into remembrance of my ways, which be in Messiah, as I teach everywhere in every church. Right? And then here in Scripture's version, it says, "Therefore I appeal to you to become imitators of me. For this reason I have sent Timotheus to you, who is my beloved and trustworthy son in the Master, who shall remind you of my ways in Messiah, as I teach everywhere in every assembly." So he's saying right there, Timothy's going to remind you of how I behave, so that you'll know what I'm teaching.
Yep. And here's the thing. He says, where I teach everywhere in every assembly or every church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. He wasn't teaching different things in different places. He wasn't saying, "Oh, well, you're Gentiles, so it doesn't apply to you." He wasn't saying that. He said every assembly.
Everyone. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to pause for a quick second and open the floor for any questions. Any questions, comments, or concerns thus far with the material that we've covered. I mean, this article is pretty extensive. We might spend about 2 weeks on this. But from what we've read so far, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead and unmute your mics. Nobody got any questions?
No, bro. I'm good. No questions.
Okay. Getting back into it. Number 4, it says, Paul, along with the other Jewish believers, continued to follow the laws of Moses after accepting the Messiah. Paul's lifestyle was Torah observant. Like Professor S just said, Paul observed the Shabbat, the Sabbath. Paul, he took on the Nazirite vow, right? He went through the purification of the Nazirite vow, both of which are identified in the Torah, right? Paul did so many things in accordance with Torah. He quoted the Torah in his own letters. He quoted the Torah often. It says, a man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. That's Acts 22:12. Okay. We often mention when Paul was put on trial for supposedly teaching against the law. They accused him of doing the same thing that he's praised for today. But he spoke for himself, and it doesn't have all the scripture from it, but it does mention it. It references it. And we've referenced it in words before, saying, hey, even in Acts, go to the book of Acts and you'll see that Paul spoke for himself, right? But this is going to show like one of the specific scriptures that he stated. So we're saying Ananias came, he was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there, right? And it says Ananias was the Christian man that the Most High selected as the agent to restore Paul's sight, baptize him, fill him with the Holy Spirit, and commission him as an apostle. And then it says, when they heard this, they praised the Most High. Then they said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed. What have they believed?
In the Messiah.
Believed in Messiah, yes. Oftentimes they're like, you got Messiah on one end and the law on the other end, and they don't go together. No. How many people have believed in Messiah? And look, what does it say? And all of them, not some of them, all of them are zealous for the law. That's Acts 21:20. Acts 21:20. Historical sources confirm that Torah observance was the norm among the Jewish Christian. I laughed when I first read this. I can't even lie, man. I was like, what is a Jewish Christian? What is that? I don't know. I don't know what that is. Paul's lifestyle did not differ in that regard. The book of Acts contains ample evidence, it does, that Paul continued to faithfully observe the Old Testament laws. I'm sorry, I'm hung up on this right here.
Yeah.
What is a Jewish Christian? Okay. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. Now, this scripture right here is often definitely misquoted, and they'd say Paul became like a Jew to win the Jews. Listen, Paul was a Jew. How does he act like, how does he became like a Jew to win the Jews if he was already a Jew? And then he says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law. So they're saying, see, when he went to the people who kept the law, he acted like he kept the law so that he could win them over. And then he says, though I myself am not under the law. You muted, brother.
My bad. I'm muted. Wouldn't that just be disingenuous, though? And wouldn't you think that that's something that you're not supposed to do? You're not supposed to deceive people into believing the truth, right? I mean, you can't really deceive people into believing the truth. If they're believing the truth based on a deception, then they're not really believing the truth. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And Paul wouldn't be going around trying to. He wouldn't be trying to deceive people into accepting the truth. He'd be trying to tell them the truth so that they believe it, right? It didn't make any sense.
Oh boy. Yeah, Paul was a Jew, family. Okay. Paul spoke for himself. He said he kept the law. What under the law means, what did under the law means when we read it in Galatians chapter 3? It meant
I'll be right back, bro.
okay.
My bad, sorry.
Under the law was regarding the curses. Regarding the curses. Okay. When you're under the law, you are subject to the curses that not keeping or observing the law brings to you. Okay. But look, even the guy in the article states this. He says, in the notes for this verse, the NIV Study Bible acknowledges, for the Jews' sake, Paul conformed to Jewish law. That isn't something that Paul could have done on a part-time basis. Unfortunately, some people would rather portray Paul as a clever hypocrite, acting like a Christian when he's with Christians, acting like a Jew when he's with Jews, and acting like a Gentile when he's with Gentiles, as if Paul might gain some missionary advantage by doing so. We know that Paul did not approve of that kind of hypocrisy because he had publicly rebuked Peter for such behavior. We read this in Galatians 2. When he openly rebuked Peter. It says, Peter had reverted to following a man-made tradition. We also know that there were very few times in Paul's ministry when he was not in the company of Jews. So what happened in this one is a quick little summary, right? What happened in this one, and we read this a couple weeks ago. Peter knew that the Gentiles received the Holy Spirit just like the Jews. So he knew that salvation was of the Gentiles as well at this point. And Peter spent time with the Gentiles. He broke bread with them. He fellowshiped with them. Everything was all good, all peachy cream. But when the Jews came around, the other Jews, then Peter started to kind of fade to black, right? And it was very disingenuous, right? And Paul called him out on it. Paul was like, bro, you acting shady. You can't, be cool with the Gentiles 1 minute, and then when the Jews come around, switch it up. That same type of behavior is what they're saying that what he means in 1 Corinthians 9:20. So why would Paul do the same thing that Peter did and then rebuke Peter for something that he was doing himself? That sounds like one of the Messiah's parables in regards to pointing out the small piece of wood in your brother's eye when you got a whole plank in your own eye. Really? And then he followed the Messiah, right? Let me just keep on. Mind my business. Mind my business. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everybody will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. This is Acts 21:24. This is when Paul was getting ready to do the purification rites, right? Because these accusations was made against Paul, and they were like, yeah, so, you know, that there's no truth in these reports about you, because they was reporting that Paul was going around teaching people to not keep the law.
Mm-hmm.
The purification rites of the
Yeah,
Nazarite.
I don't know how anyone could read Acts and everything that Paul did, and how many times he said, "No, I keep the law."
Bruh.
How many times he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day to teach, you know? And then they say, "Oh, see, Paul was no." I don't know. It's
I've heard them say that Paul went and did this, that Paul only did this to appease the Jews so that he wouldn't have any smoke from them. I'm like, why would he appease? Listen, Paul said that he counts his life worthless compared to the value of knowing the Messiah, and that he would gladly give his life and die for the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So why would he purposefully do some nonsense like this, right, to appease anybody?
Yeah.
He wasn't worried about man's approval.
And they stoned him all the time anyways, you know, and left him for dead, you know. And Paul got stoned, what, how many times did he say? Like 8 times or something, and left for dead?
Right.
He's just like he doesn't, he's not gonna be like, well, let me appease them. No, yeah. There's no appeasing. I mean, shaving your head isn't gonna appease people who want you dead, who tried to kill you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not like they'd be like, oh, well, suddenly it's okay. You know, he shaved his head. You know what I'm saying?
We were gonna stone you and kill you, but since you shaved your head, we're gonna let you go.
right, yeah, no, they wouldn't do that.
Be bald and be saved. No. The context of this passage refers to the law of Moses. James and the apostles who were acquainted with Paul knew that Paul was Torah observant. By joining in the purification rites, it would become apparent to everyone that Paul had been living in obedience to the law. Paul did join in the purification rites, so today everyone should know that Paul himself was living in obedience to the law of Moses. There was no truth in the rumors that Paul was teaching people to turn away from Moses. The reason why he said join in so that everybody will know, because Paul could have went through this whole thing on his own. He could have went and carried out the instruction of the Torah for the purification process, basically in secret. But they asked him to join in with the rest of the people who were going through them so that it could be witnessed that Paul was also doing it as well.
Oh, you know, I just had looked up that Acts 21:24.
Okay, hold on. Pull it up.
All right. 21:24. We'll see another recurring word here. This is them. Take and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things whereof they were informed concerning thee are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. Now, scriptures here, take them and cleanse them with the and pay their expenses, so that they shave their heads, pay their expenses. That's because you know, whenever you go through that, you have to take stuff to the temple and so forth. And all shall know that what they have been informed about you is not so, but that you yourself also walk orderly, keeping the Torah, not disorderly, not lawlessly, but orderly, morally, keeping the Torah. Because that's what morality is keeping the Torah. That's the true morality.
Yeah, absolutely. Good thing to point out. I love looking at various scriptures.
You get so much by looking at different translations, man.
Oh yeah. What does it say? Okay. Paul didn't do this to appease the Jews, like I was just saying earlier. When he left Corinth earlier, Paul's head was shaved as part of a vow that he had not yet completed. To fulfill that earlier vow, it was necessary for Paul to participate in these purification rites in Jerusalem. So yeah, he quotes Acts 18:18 and Numbers 6. Remember, I told you the Nazirite vow is found in Numbers chapter 6. So this is just him acknowledging that he just learned about the Nazirite vow, and he's referencing that in his paper. But we already know what the Nazirite vow is and everything like that. So it says, if Paul had been in the habit of disregarding the law of Moses, it would have been deceitful for Paul to join in the purification rites, knowing that everyone would think he had been living according to the law. It also would have been deceitful for James and the elders to recommend a course of action that would have intentionally misled the believers in Jerusalem. So it is apparent that Paul really had been living in obedience to the law all along. That's fact.
And another thing to think here, if he's trying to confuse the Jews and lead them to Messiah, if he's trying to lead them away from the Torah to Messiah and away from the Torah, right? Which that's like a total contradiction. But let's say that's what they try to say. Oh yeah, well that's what he's doing. He's trying to make them believe in the Messiah, so he has to make them believe that he's keeping the law. Well, then they're going to continue keeping the law. If in fact what he was trying to do was lead them away from the law, he wouldn't be keeping it, because that would only confuse them even more. It just, none of it makes any sense. unless you go with what the Bible actually says.
Yeah, leading them away from the law
By
trying
keeping
to
it.
lead them to Messiah is, look, watch my hands. Leading them away from the law to try to lead them to Messiah is actually leading them to the law.
Right.
And if it was opposite, leading them away from the law, leading them away from the Messiah to lead them to the law is still pointing to the Messiah, because the Messiah is the law. He's the Torah. He's the living embodiment of the written code that was given to us.
Mm-hmm.
It just don't make sense. Over these years, it doesn't make sense anymore. But that don't mean that it makes sense to everybody else. So that's why we're doing this. So it says, Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to the Most High in all good conscience to this day." Acts 23:1. Many Christians today could say the same thing that Paul said. However, a few moments later, Paul also stated that he was a Pharisee, which defines more clearly what he and the Sanhedrin understood as his duty to the Most High.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, right? Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee," right? So I'm a descendant of a Pharisee. "I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." Acts 23:6. So he's telling them he's a Pharisee. He's identifying with the group. So now this, like he said in up here, he's basically solidifying what his stance was. Although Paul evidently said this in order to take advantage of the dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, it would not have worked if Paul had not been living in accordance with the law of Moses. In that case, it would probably have been laughter rather than a dispute that broke out in the Sanhedrin when Paul claimed to be a Pharisee. Apparently, there was enough evidence to show that Paul's claim to being a Pharisee was valid. Some of the Pharisees argued vigorously, "We find nothing wrong with this man," Acts 23:9. It is doubtful they would have said this about a man who was not following the teachings of Moses. because they was very strict and zealous of the law, right?
Oh
So if
yeah, oh
you
yeah. They were scrutinizing him. They were scrutinizing his life, probably scrutinizing everything that it had ever been reported that he had said. You know what I'm saying?
Facts. What else? Where was I at?
Subsequent.
Subsequently,
Yeah.
huh?
No, I was you were at subsequent.
Subsequently, subsequent passages show how determined the Jews were to be rid of Paul, which makes this vindication of Paul by some of his enemies even more significant. Because you had the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they always beefing. They beefing. It's a resurrection? No, it's not a resurrection. There is a resurrection. I can prove it's a resurrection. And they just go back and forth over and over and over again, right? However, I admit that I worship the Elohim of our fathers as a follower of the way. Now, what way is he talking about? Mind you, this is Acts 24 and 14. So he's in the same presence of the people he mentioned in the above verse. What is the way when you're talking to a group of people who are zealous of the law? What is the way? We ain't talking about I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Nobody gets to the Father but through me, from this New Testament understanding. No, Paul's saying the way. The way is the law, the way is the Torah, because that's what they would have identified with, right? Which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law. This is Paul's own mouth. He agrees, or he believes everything that agrees with the law. And that is written in the prophets. This is from Paul's own mouth. And we'll go way more in detail when we finally get to the book of Acts, you know, regarding Paul's epistles. We're going to finish, like I said, we're going to finish in Acts. Because this got all types of nails for the coffin.
And then just to go a little further with the way, right? What is the way? You got Psalm 119. 119 verse 1, blessed are the undefiled in the way who walk in the Torah of the Most High. And 119:29, remove from me the way of living and grant me thy law graciously. That one's actually not a good reference. I apologize for that one. Then Proverbs 6:23, for the commandment is a lamp and the law is a light, and reproofs and instructions are the way of life. Where's these reproofs and instructions? So you've got that there. We go back to let's see.
Which was the psalm that David was talking about, delighting in the Most High's precepts and hating every false way?
False way. That's let's see. Hang on a sec.
Every false way.
I'll find that real fast. Yeah. 119:128. Psalm 119:128. It says, or actually in 104 also. In Psalm 119:104, it says, though thy precept, or through thy precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. Psalm 119:128. Therefore I esteem all thy precepts concerning all things to be right, and I hate every false way.
False way. Well, the correct way is the precepts. The precepts is the law. Then he says, when Paul appeared, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Done, right? Now, people need more evidence than this, though. But it says that the charges that was brought against him was that he was teaching against the law, but they couldn't prove it. Remember, when you're following that Torah, you got to have at least 2 witnesses, right? But they couldn't prove it. Because guess what? Paul did not teach against the law. Duh. Then Paul made his defense. Okay, so let's hear what Paul has to say. I have done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against Caesar. The reason why Caesar is even mentioned is because who was in power and who held control over the region during this time? Rome. That's why a lot of the messianic prophetic believers during the time was waiting on Messiah to come so he could literally liberate Israel from the rulership, the thumb of Rome. We've seen the Romans involved in the crucifixion, right? Remember they cast the lots? Remember the one Roman soldier stabbed the Messiah in the side? Remember the Messiah had a whole conversation with the Roman appointed governor before he was sentenced? Rome was evident during this time. And it says,
and see the whole reason, not to get too far off on a rabbit trail, but in Genesis 49, it talks about the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. Shiloh is a term for the Messiah, right? And so basically, and the scepter represents the authority to put someone to death, right? The king had the authority to have someone put to death. That's what the scepter represented. So, in fact, it was very shortly, just basically the year Messiah was born, and this is recorded in Josephus, that Rome took away the Jews' ability to have someone put to death. Rome basically said, "Nah, I mean, you can do all these other things, but if someone needs to be put to death, only the Romans can decide that, right?" Yeah. So that's why they were going to Pilate to have Messiah put to death, because they didn't actually have the authority to do it. Interesting that prophecy would come up, because had that prophecy not been fulfilled, then they wouldn't have had to go through Rome to do it and all of that, and then other prophecies could be fulfilled. But so the Romans had to put Messiah to death. After that, there was this big thing going on, and they got to where so basically, in order to have the Romans put Messiah to death, they had to claim that Messiah was teaching people not to follow Caesar, right? So they even told Pilate that. They said, "Look, Pilate, if you don't have him put to death, then you're not a friend of Caesar, because he's speaking against Caesar." And so Pilate was like in this bad position where he had the Romans that would think, the other Romans would be like, "Yeah, he should be putting him to death." Then the Jews were thinking, "Oh, well, yeah, he should be," and then it was going to be this huge thing, and it could have actually erupted into, see, politically at the time, the Romans and the Jews were not. It was technically under Roman rule, but they only had like a garrison there. It wasn't like it was actually part of the kingdom, right? It wasn't part of Rome. It was like a garrison that, and then the Romans set up a puppet government in Herod, but it also acted as a buffer zone to the other side. So Israel acted as a buffer zone to the other side of the Roman Empire, where technically the Persian, what was previously Persia, was part of the Roman Empire, but they were more or less in the middle of they were not on good terms, and so Israel right there was a buffer zone in between. And had they lost, so maintaining control over Israel was important to the Roman emperor, right? Because if they lost control of Israel, then that would give the Persians more ground to move against them, right? So Pilate had all these different political things going on at the same time. He's got the political structure of the Jews, who were coming at him saying, hey, look, you got to do this because he's breaking our Torah and he's doing this. And then he's got the Romans he's got to deal with. He's got the puppet government that he's got to deal with, who's set up to control the Jews. And then on the other side, there's factions in Persia that are trying to come over and basically go to war with Rome and reclaim their independence. And he's in one of the most sensitive areas in the whole Roman Empire. And then he's got the Jews saying, oh, well, you're not even a friend of Caesar if you don't have. So basically right here, he's saying, look, I haven't done anything against the Jews. I haven't done anything against the Torah, and I haven't done anything against Caesar even. What are you talking about? So Paul's even because, it's still this situation here. He's like, I haven't even done anything against Caesar. And here y'all are saying I'm not keeping the law. I'm all this stuff. He's like, but I am, so. Just a little rabbit trail there, but interesting to understand the politics of the time.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. I'll throw another carrot in there too. In addition to all of that, right? Tensions were high in Israel during that time because the Jews was not rocking with the Romans, and the Romans wasn't rocking with the Jews.
Yep.
And so what happened was, even though Pilate was the governor, like he said, there was only a garrison. A garrison is just a small military unit based in a small area. It was probably like a compound or a series of houses or a tower that they had built that was makeshift and it wasn't that strong. That's where, they had set up shop. So one, they're there by themselves with a few different soldiers. They outnumber and overwhelmed by Jewish people or by Jews, right? So if they would have, did one wrong move and there was a revolt, who worried about the Persians with the Roman Empire? The Jews would have came and took them out. So in addition to all of the political aspects, he had a political issue and incident right there. And here's the thing. The Jews wasn't going to listen directly to Pilate. Pilate would give orders to his Roman soldiers, or he would, pass decrees to Israel, but he would go to the Sanhedrin and get the elders and tell them what it was, and then they would disperse that to the people, and the people would then follow the elders because they followed the Sanhedrin. So if he did not appeal to the Sanhedrin's request to crucify the Messiah, the Sanhedrin had the power and authority and influence of the people to kind of cause a revolt. You know what I'm saying? So that was
that's why Pilate tried to pass the buck to Herod and say, well, he's under Herod's jurisdiction. Give him to Herod. Because Herod was the puppet ruler that was set up by the Romans, but that was on the under the appearance of being a Jew, right? So so he's like, he tried to pass the buck to Herod and be like, I don't even want to touch this because I'm gonna have a revolt either way, because he felt like well, this guy's followers, because rabbis had followers all the time at that point, and a lot of them became very zealous. And you had zealots that tried to overthrow the Romans several times and had to be put down by the guards there, right? And he's like, well, this guy's got a lot of followers. It's not like a small amount of followers. So if I have him put to death, then his followers might come and attack this compound as well, So he's like, do I go with what the Sanhedrin wants, or what's going to appease his followers? But then when they started saying, well, if you don't do it, then you're not a friend of Caesar, then what's happening is they're trying to turn Pilate's own men against him, right? And he's like, man, I can't have this. So he was just, how can I get out of this? And so he tried to pass the buck to Herod. He's like, let Herod decide.
That's 8:50. Wow, time went by quick.
Oh, really? Oh my goodness.
All right, so we'll go down and we'll stop at number 5. We'll stop right here and then we'll pick up on number 5 next week. So let me go back to, okay, that's what we just read. So he says, I thank the Most High, whom I serve, okay? I thank the Most High, whom I serve, as my forefathers did, with a clear conscience as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. How do you serve the Most High? Through obedience. What do you be obedient to? His instructions, as his forefathers did. Who was his forefathers? He said he was of the tribe of Benjamin. His forefathers was Israel. What did Israel do? They kept the law. So he served his father just like his forefathers, and they did what? They kept the law. Then he says, the Jews all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child. So he's appealing testimony to the witnesses that are present. Yo, the Jews know me since I was a kid, bro. I've been rocking like this since I was,
since day one, man.
day one. From the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem, they have known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that according to the strictest sect of our religion, I lived as a Pharisee. The strictest sect of our religion, I lived as a Pharisee. Notice that Paul says our religion instead of their religion. Paul still thought of himself as a part of the Jewish religion. Apparently, Paul's behavior had been fairly consistent ever since he was a child. It's not like that Paul would have invented the Jews to testify that he lived as a Pharisee unless he was still living essentially as a Pharisee, because the Jews would have been eager to challenge rather than to verify Paul's testimony. Facts. Because listen, everybody that's present wasn't his friend. So if he made a statement like that and somebody from the other side, if there was any fault in what he said, if he wasn't living that lifestyle since he was a kid, one of the other people who was not his friend, who was not on his side, who's of the Sadducees, would have been like, no, you're wrong. I remember when you were 8 years old, you did XYZ. I remember when you were 13, da 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 da.
And this actually goes to show the level of integrity that even the hypocritical Jews had, that they wouldn't bear false witness in a trial like this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Because because they followed the law, right? So according to Torah, what is the punishment for bearing false witness against your brother? Punishable by death.
Well, whatever was going to be done to him. So if they were trying to put him to death, then they would have gotten a false witness gets whatever they were intending to have done to the other person.
Yeah, they was trying to get rid of him.
Yeah. So if they're trying to have Paul put to death, then being a false witness, and if it was provable that they were a false witness, they'd also be put to death.
Yeah. And then it says, 3 days later, he called together the leaders of the Jews when they had assembled. Paul said to them, my brothers, although I have done nothing against our people or against the customs of our ancestors, I was arrested in Jerusalem and handed over to the Romans. He did nothing. He had done nothing against our people or against our customs of our ancestors. Who was his ancestors? Remember, he's of the tribe of Benjamin. His ancestors are the Benjamites. His ancestors are those who are of the 12 tribes of Israel. His ancestors are Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, so on and so forth, right? There you go. What did they do? How did they live? What were their customs? What was the culture? He's saying he's in agreement with that. He's done nothing against it. Their entire way of life, he is living, or he's saying that he is living in accordance with that. And that goes back to the lifestyle that this guy is trying to prove, you know what I'm saying, earlier up there. So it says in the New Testament, it was the enemies of the Christians who falsely accused the believers of breaking the law of Moses and teaching others to disregard it too. Today, it is Christians themselves who sometimes repeat those same assertions about Paul. If Paul were in habit of disregarding the Torah instructions, then we would expect to find recorded in the New Testament at least one instance where Paul disobeyed the Torah. However, no such record exists. what they do is they find records, they find verses or parts or portions of verses and try to twist it to twist the the meaning. Oh, this sounds like it means this, or Paul is sounding like he's meaning that. No. What does Paul state? And we've read in Acts from his own mouth that he's saying what he said, right? He can't switch up. He can't say, I keep the law in Acts, and then later on in Romans, like, y'all shouldn't keep the law. But it says, should we assume that Paul is guilty of law breaking until someone proves him innocent? Not according to scripture. 2 or 3 truthful witnesses are required, that's Torah, before we can find a person guilty of transgressing the law. That's Deuteronomy 19:15, 1 Timothy 5:19. Through his words and action, Paul repeatedly led people to believing that he was living according to the law of Moses. See above. It should be safe to assume that Paul's testimony about his own lifestyle is true. Why would he lie about his own lifestyle? That's stupid. Or will we choose to affirm instead the same assertions that Paul's and his enemies directed against him? So basically what he's saying is, the way I read it, the way I understand it, are we going to believe Paul from his own mouth? Are we going to believe him with his own actions, with his own words? Or are we going to believe our own interpretation of letters to which we admit that we don't have the whole picture? It don't make sense. If you see a fire burning with your own 2 eyes, are you going to believe it is fire? Or are you going to believe somebody, or like maybe police pull up and they write a report, and then you're going to read the report of the police and they didn't mention anything about a fire? You saw it with your own 2 eyes. We heard it from the horse's mouth, from Paul. But we'll stop right there, and we'll pick up here at number 5 with these verses next week. This is a much needed break from Galatians chapter 3. I appreciate you guys for being here. And for those watching at home, I will definitely put this link to this article in the description so you can go and check out this article for yourself. It is a good read. We're almost caught up to where I read to. I think I got to number 6 or number 7. Reading it on my own. So next week, we definitely gonna get into some stuff that I haven't even seen before. And I'm not even gonna finish reading the article. I'm gonna read this article with y'all live on here so y'all can see. We'll all, get through this together. But
how Christianity has changed.
Oh, didn't mean to do that. My bad. But with that being said, family, thank you guys for coming on here. Before we close it out, anybody got any comments, questions, concerns? I appreciate the article because, like I said, I identify with it, right? A lot of the points that the individual made. Matter of fact, what was this name? The person on this article, his name is Ron Amundsen, RONAMMUNDSEN, Ron Amundsen. So shout out to Ron Amundsen for putting together this article. You can tell it was very well put through and thorough. There's some scholarship. There's definitely scholarship here. And like I said earlier, I appreciate the fact that a Christian can come to this conclusion on their own, instead of maybe trying to find more reasons to justify their own beliefs. So this was dope for me so far. Dope article.
Yeah, really good article. Actually, I'm enjoying it. It's pretty good.
If you like the channel and you like our content, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time we drop a video, because we're only here for y'all to edify y'all. So we're here to we aspire to inspire, right? This is Truth Talk Radio. I'm Solemn Prophet. This is Professor S. Thank you.
Professor S.
Shabbat Shalom, family. Love you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, family.
Shabbat shalom, family. Love you all.
No church, no church,
Two
no
or more
church.
gathered, they with the master.
Why is truth not addressed and sin not confessed? I'm crying for my people, wanna cling them to my chest. Pews filled and overdressed, smiling but overstressed. Understanding I don't meat, they still sucking milk from the breast. So yes, carnal minds can't ascertain the spiritual. And lost sheep go to the church for a miracle. Like the pastor is Messiah, but salvation comes from higher, cause the word is so beyond the physical.